A brutal winter storm had swallowed the western plains in a roaring white silence, the kind that made even the strongest ranchers question their own endurance, when a rugged man named Dawson Hale stepped out of his barn, brushing snow from his hat, unaware that fate was about to pull him into a story he never expected to live. The wind screamed across the land, carrying with it a sting sharp enough to cut through leather, yet through that blinding storm came a small, trembling figure, a little girl, no older than 6, stumbling toward him with frozen tears streaking her cheeks and a worn straw doll clenched tightly in her fist. She wasn't dressed for the cold, her thin red dress whipped violently around her legs, and her boots were soaked through. Dawson rushed to her instantly, reaching out just as she nearly collapsed into his arms, and when he knelt to her level, his steady voice barely rose above the storm as he asked, "Where's your family, sweetheart?" But the girl could only shake her head, sobbing, and finally choked out, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The fear in her voice hit him harder than the wind ever could. Her name was Lila, she whispered, clutching her doll as if it were the last piece of comfort she had left in the world. Dawson stood, wrapped his coat around her tiny shoulders, and asked her to show him where her mother had gone. With shaking hands, she pointed toward the old winter trail, an abandoned path no one sane used during storms. Every instinct in Dawson told him time was slipping fast, no one survived long out there alone. He lifted Lila onto his horse, mounted behind her, and urged the animal forward into the swirling white abyss. The wind fought them with a ferocity Dawson had rarely felt, whipping against his face, hiding every familiar landmark. Lila clung to him tightly, her straw doll pressed between them as she explained, in broken whispers, that her mother had left to gather wood before the storm worsened but never returned. Guilt twisted in Dawson's chest, this woman had been fighting to keep her daughter warm when nature turned on her. Dawson leaned forward, scanning the endless expanse, searching for any sign of life. The world was a blur of white, shifting shapes, and deceptive shadows, but he pressed on, knowing every second mattered. Then, just as he began to fear the worst, Lila suddenly screamed and pointed ahead. Dawson pulled the reins sharply, narrowing his eyes through the storm until he saw it, a faint, motionless shape half buried in snow. His heart dropped. He leapt from the horse, grabbed Lila's small hand, and ran toward the collapsed figure. The woman lay limp, her prairie dress stiff with frost, her skin pale as the snow beneath her. Lila fell to her knees beside her, crying out, "Mama," in a voice that could shatter stone. Dawson knelt and pressed his fingers to the woman's neck, there, beneath the icy skin, a faint, struggling pulse. She was alive, but barely. The freezing wind pummeled them without mercy as Dawson wrapped the woman in his arms, lifting her with every ounce of strength he had. "Lila, stay close," he urged, but the little girl was already gripping his vest, refusing to let go. Their horse whinnied nervously, its breath fogging the air as Dawson secured the unconscious woman across the saddle and helped Lila climb up. Then he mounted behind them, holding both mother and child against him as he steered the horse toward the distant, barely visible outline of his ranch. The journey back was even more brutal, the storm seemed furious, as if trying to tear the three of them from the world entirely. Snow lashed at them, the wind howled like a wounded beast, and Dawson's hands numbed against the reins. Still, he pushed forward, guided by the faint hope that warmth, fire, and life waited at the ranch. At last, the dim light of the cabin flickered through the storm like a fragile beacon. Dawson burst inside, carried the woman straight to the hearth, and layered blankets over her frozen body. Lila remained at her side, gripping her mother's hand and crying prayers into the silence. Dawson worked quickly, warming blankets, heating water, rubbing life back into the woman's cold skin. Minutes felt like hours until finally, the woman's lips twitched, her shallow breaths grew stronger, and her eyelids fluttered open. The first thing she saw was her daughter's tear-streaked face. Lila let out a cry of relief and threw her arms around her mother, whispering, "Mama, you came back. I found you." The woman, whose name Dawson later learned was Mary, could only hold her daughter close, tears glistening in her weak eyes. She whispered that she had lost her way when the storm struck harder than expected, wandering blindly until she collapsed. She would have frozen to death had Lila not bravely run across the plains for help, and had Dawson not answered the desperate knock. As the storm outside finally began to settle into a quiet, heavy snowfall, Dawson looked out the window at the vast white land that had nearly stolen 2 lives. But in that same cold wilderness, a little girl's courage, a mother's love, and a rancher's determination had proved stronger than nature's fury. Lila walked up to Dawson, tugged gently on his sleeve, and whispered with a soft, trembling smile, "Thank you for saving my mom." Dawson crouched down, placed a warm, reassuring hand on her shoulder, and replied, "You saved her first, little one. I just helped bring her home." And in that small cabin, lit by a crackling fire and filled with the soft breathing of a family reunited, hope rose like a sunrise against the fading storm.